Thank you, Professor Dahi, for having me, and thank you for to Dr. Farad and also to your institute for inviting me today. I am from Iran. I am Kurdish, and I was born and raised in Eastern Kurdistan or Iranian Kurdistan, or what is known as Rojhelat. I received my PhD in sociology from Shiraz University, and right after that, I became a professor of sociology at Bu Ali University in Hamadan, and for 5 years. In 2011, I was dismissed from academia by the Iranian state and was forced to leave Iran to basically first to Iraq, where I taught for 2 years at Erbil University. And after that, I was fortunate to move to United States to accept the position as a visiting scholar of anthropology at Vanderbilt University. In terms of my background, well, all Kurds are born political. And when you are Kurdish, it means that you're already a politicized or securitized object or subject, let's say. So I have this experience of collective punishments like all Kurds. When you are Kurdish, your language is denied, your culture is marginalized, you are underrepresented. Well, but in addition to these collective punishments that I have been through in my life since very days of my childhood, let's say, I also have my own personal experience of discrimination, and what later basically shaped my scholarship, discrimination and suppression of Kurds and other minorities in Iran. Well, the last episode was my dismissal from academia in 2011, in which I was forced to leave the country. So this background, this personal background, Professor Dahi, gave a sense of purpose, direction to my scholarship. So my scholarship is heavily built on and basically informed by my lived experience, both as a person and also as a member of an underrepresented community in Iran.
Let's get into the research on the Kolbers. And in order to really understand the research a little bit better, why don't you give us the context of Rojhelat, where this research is taking place and where most of the Kolbers or all the Kolbers are found. Give us a little bit of sense of the context and set us up by explaining to us a little bit more about Rojhelat.
Thank you. Great. This is a great question. Where is Rojhelat? That's the great question that can set stage for our discussion. Well, Rojhelat is referred to the basically eastern part of the Greater Kurdistan or northwest Iran. So Rojhelat is comprised of the 4 provinces of Western Azerbaijan: Kurdistan, Kermanshah, and Ilam, which are 4 provinces. All of them are Kurdish. They speak Kurdish, and they are mostly Sunni Muslim. In terms of population, Kurdistan makes, Eastern Kurdistan basically makes around 10 to 12 millions, which constitutes around 10%, 12% of the Iran's total population. Kurdistan also is this is the tricky part. Basically, it's a very important part of our discussion, that Kurdistan is a rich, a wealthy region in terms of natural and human resources. Just to give you just some examples of the Rojhelat in terms of the natural resources and human resources, Kurdistan has the largest natural resources in terms of minerals. For example, it has the largest deposit of bitumen in the Middle East. It also, in terms of the other minerals like barite, like iron, like gold ore, it ranked from 1 to 3rd on country and in the region in some of those deposits. In terms of agriculture, also Kurdistan produces around 70%, 80% of the wheat and also the grains in the entire, basically, on country level. But at the same time, don't get me wrong, because Kurdistan's agriculture is rain-fed, it's uncommercialized, it's labor-intensive, it's traditional. So my question in my research is that this is my big question, that that basically, foregrounds my scholarship. Why this beautiful and rich and wealthy region of eastern of Kurdistan in general, or Iran as a country, why this beautiful region has become so impoverished? What is going on in there? So when you ask this question, it takes you to a sort of historical journey into the roots of the impoverishment and underdevelopment of Kurdistan, which goes back to the, let's say, very short, goes back to the early days of the establishment of the modern state. I don't want to get into these details, but over last century, since 1925, with the establishment of the Iran as a modern state, well, the Iranian state has been built on the idea of one country, one language, and one nation, which is basically based on the Persian language and Shia religion, and that that kind of understanding basically divided the entire population into sovereign and non-sovereign communities. So the Kurdish people, they have different language, they have different religion, they have different identity. They resisted the state assimilatory and basically genocidal policies for decades, and then they have been subjected basically to state oppression and suppression and all kind of economic marginalization. So in that context, it is in that context that Omar, a large portion of Kurdish community, they find themselves with no option but to engage into such a precarious labor such as Kolberi. Well, the Kolberi has been there for decades in Kurdistan as a sort of traditional smuggling of importing goods from Iraq to Iran, but it's after 2005 with the Ahmadinejad presidency, during the Ahmadinejad presidency, that Kolberi start to become a sort of dominant labor in Rojhelat. And from 2015 to 2005 to 2015, there is a 10 years between here that the state adopts some sort of economic and political policies that finally resulted in the prevalence of the Kolberi in 2015. And since 2015, we have been facing with this humanitarian crisis in the borderland.
Great. So let's get more into who the Kolbers are. And I'm struck by a line from the article, Life and Labor on the Internal Colonial Edge, that you co-authored with Kamal Soleimani, where you say Kolberi is not technically illegal, but it is punishable by death without ever being designated as a crime. And that line really struck me in terms of the status of the Kolberi. So tell us a little bit more, what is Kolberi? What does Kolberi mean? Who are the Kolbers? What do they do? And how did you come to conduct research on this group of people, and why you think it's important?
Well, I have to say that unfortunately we came to study Kolberi very late. And this paper, as you might know, with Professor Soleimani, it is the only scholarly work on Kolbers, which is very sad, unfortunately. But hopefully it would be the building block of the scholarship on this issue. Well, as I said, the Kolberi comes from the terms of kol and beri. Omar, kol means basically back, and beri means carrying. But Kolbers are people who carry goods on their back across the Iran, Turkey, and Iraq border, basically. So they import goods mostly from Iraq into Iran. So since 2015, as a result of the decades of the state suppression, economic marginalization, and securitizing and militarizing policies adopted by the state against the Kurds, Kolberi has become a dominant. It has emerged in Kurdistan. In 2015, it's from 2015 that we have, this job becomes dominant in the region. Since 2015, more than 200,000 people, according to the state official records, is what they say. 200,000 people in Rojhelat, in eastern Kurdistan, are engaged in such a precarious labor. They carry goods on their back in all 4 seasons, basically. So and they get shot. This is, as you mentioned, the Kolberi, in terms of the legal status, is unclear. There is no labor law in Iran that indicates the illegality or legality of Kolberi. And actually, it helps the state to, to exercise the maximum violence in the region against Kurds, because there is no legal base, no illegal, basically, base for treating Kolbers like this. So since 2015, 200,000 people in Rojhelat have become Kolbers, and since 2015, Omar, more than 1,500 people have been killed or injured by the state forces, by the state patrols in the region. There is not a single day in Rojhelat that we don't have casualties. Direct shooting is the primary cause of Kolber casualties. More than 80% of those Kolbers, they get killed or injured by direct shooting by the state patrol. So you might ask, so why they carry, why they import, what they import, what are the goods that they import? Well, those goods that they import, basically, they are not illegal. They are exchanged, they are used, consumed across Iran. So things like, let's say, TV, furnitures, food, groceries, all kind of stuff are imported by the Kolbers. And but at the same time, as I said, there is a great deal of violence going on in the region in terms of the shooting and injuring. And also one other thing that the Kolbers now are facing with is that, as we have mentioned in our paper, the entire Eastern Kurdistan border is covered with landmines. There are more than 20 million landmines that were implanted. They were remained after the Iraq war. They were never cleared out. 16 million of those landmines are located in Eastern Kurdistan, in these 4 provinces. So this is the second reason of the Kolber casualties. When they escape the border patrol, when they disoriented in the snow, they end up in the minefields, and basically they get killed or injured. This is another reason for Kolber casualties, also associated with the state acts of violence in a way.
And one of the things I found really fascinating about your article, and this is research that you've continued now that forms the basis, I believe, of your doctoral dissertation, if I'm correct, is that you give agency to the Kolbers, you give agency to these individuals, and have interviewed many of them, and they have a very interesting and really sophisticated political critique of both their status, but also of what you label in your paper as, for example, even attempts to depoliticize their plight and make it an issue of economic management. Here you mentioned that Kurdish MPs, for instance, as viewed as those who, especially during their election campaigns, try to normalize Kurdish oppression with their empty promises and make it just another symptom of economic management rather than asymmetric power relations. So tell us a little bit about the process of interviewing and talking to those Kolbers and getting to know them a little bit more, and what is the daily life like for them? They also have surprising backgrounds. Some of them are published authors who were graduate students who were sort of forced into through not finding alternatives. Tell us a little bit more about
them. Well, in terms of the demographic profile of the Kolberi, as we mentioned, the age of Kolberi, Omar, the average age of Kolberi is getting younger and younger day by day. The average age is around 29 years old. So I spoke with Kolbers that was 75 years old. And also there are Kolbers who are 10 years old. So the average is 29. Of course, that's what I'm saying, because we don't have enough information about the age, because the level, the quantity, and basically the bulk of violence is to the extent that we can't basically keep up with, unfortunately, with that sort of information to collect our data. Well, on daily basis, the Kolbers get killed, so we don't have enough information, valid information. We don't have any source to reach out. But the average is 25. In my project, as we mentioned, I highlighted two components. The first one is that the child Kolbers. Many of those Kolbers are underage. They are less than 18 years old. As I said, we have 10 years old. And some of those, even those underage Kolbers, anyway, they get shot. They get aimed shot. They get killed by the state authorities. And the other component of my research is the gender. The women in recent years, the number of those women who engage in Kolberi, Omar, is increasing. As I said, when you put it in perspective, the Iranian government tries to say that, as we mentioned, to explain that by referring to economic sanction by the international community, by the United States, or as a sort of mismanagement. But we are talking about the 14 years of the underdevelopment of the region, and even longer. When you go back to the before Islamic Revolution, the only factory right now in Eastern Kurdistan, the only factory, Omar, is built in 1968, which is a sugar factory. So this has nothing to do with underdevelopment. This has nothing to do with the international sanctions against Iran. Well, the Kurdish people in Iran, first and foremost, they are sanctioned by their own government, by their own regime, basically, and then after that, by the international sanction. And one more thing, in terms of industry, again, the Kurdistan, in terms of economic structure, is highly traditional. Only 2% of the Kurdistan economic structure is basically based on the industry, in which only 200 people in the entire Eastern Kurdistan, Omar. 10 million, we have 10 million people, but only 200 people are engaged in industry. That means that, the role of industry is near to nothing. So when you put this Kolberi, that's what we are doing. And in this paper with Professor Suleimani, and also in our research, in upcoming research on this project, we are trying to put this in perspective to avoid this narrative produced by the state that this is a domestic problem, this can be seen everywhere in the world, this can be seen everywhere in Iran. No, this is exceptional. This is an outcome of the decades of the deliberate economic sanction against the Kurds, against the Iranian minority, and it has a lot to do with the ethno-religious discourse that underpins the Iranian nationalism as it is.
So tell us a little bit about your mapping project. You're developing a mapping project based on the vast amount of data that you have collected of incidents involving the Kolbers. So as a last insight into their life, you have a project that attempts to map out these instances. Tell us a little bit about that and what you hope to accomplish from an academic perspective, but also raising awareness perspective on this issue.
Well, that's exactly what we are doing. I forgot to talk about this issue, that part of my research is based on the oral histories and the narratives by the Kolbers. So part of my research is based on this. So I'm going to highlight, to give voice to those people, because they have been subjected not only to the state oppression, but also to the kind of epistemic violence, because they are not here, they are silenced, their voices, nobody knows about the Kolbers, even many Kurds probably they don't know about the dynamics and mechanics of the Kolbers. So that's what I'm doing. Part of my research is basically built on the Kolbers' narratives of their life, what life looks like for them, how does it mean to become a Kolber, why someone becomes a Kolber, and when you are Kolber, what life looks like for you, who engages into this kind of work. And then from there, I want to basically give voice to those people, and also I want to promote the awareness. And fortunately, with this paper and also with other works that are done by other scholars in the region, there has been a sort of public awareness about the Kolbers' lives and labor in the region. What I'm going to accomplish, Omar, if I want to summarize, I want to provide a very detailed account of the Kolbers' lives and labor in the region in light of the Iranian ethno-religious, basically nationalism. I want to show how Kolberi is an outcome of internal colonialism, is a deliberate outcome of the sort of deliberate policy against the Kurds. And from there, I am going to talk about how the minorities' lives in Iran look like. So it has a lot to do. I am kind of shifting between these boundaries between the state, sovereignty, minorities. And I think that the Kolberi, of course, can be illustrative in many ways of the state minorities in the region, in Iran, and the state minorities in the Middle East at large. So there is a lot to be completed, but at the same time, it is a building block. I have a long way ahead. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was really great chatting with you again, and good luck with your research, and really look forward to speaking with you as this research develops and you develop particularly this mapping project, which is going to be very important in of itself, and also as a resource for scholars who are interested in learning more about Rojhelat and about the Kolbers in general. So thank you so much, Ahmad.
Thank you, Professor Day.